I never imagined my life would change the way it did that chilly autumn afternoon. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched underfoot as people hurried past, paying no attention to the young beggar girl huddled on the sidewalk. I sat on my usual corner, wrapped in a tattered blanket that barely kept the cold at bay. The city was bustling, the cacophony of car horns and chatter filling the air. But I felt invisible, a ghost among the living. It was then that I noticed a leather briefcase half buried in a pile of fallen leaves by the edge of the sidewalk. Curiosity piqued. I pulled it out, brushing away the leaves and dirt. The briefcase was worn but sturdy, with a brass lock that had seen better days. My heart raced as I fumbled with the clasp, finally opening it to reveal a stack of important-looking documents. The name on the topmost paper read Thomas Harding, a name I had only heard in passing but knew belonged to a wealthy and influential man. As I sifted through the papers, I realized these were no ordinary documents. They looked like contracts, legal papers, and financial statements, the kind that could be worth a fortune. A small voice in my head urged me to sell them, to use the money to change my dire situation. But a stronger, more insistent voice told me to do the right thing. Maybe, just maybe, returning these documents could be my chance for a better life. Determined, I made my way through the crowded streets toward the Harding mansion. It was as grand as I had imagined, towering and imposing with its ornate gates and manicured gardens. I hesitated at the gate, feeling out of place and unworthy. Gathering my courage, I pressed the intercom button. Yes, a voice crackled through the speaker. Hi, I have something important for Mr. Harding. I found his briefcase, I stammered. Wait there, the voice replied curtly. A few minutes later, the gate opened, and a stern-looking woman approached me. Her gray hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her sharp eyes assessed me with suspicion. She introduced herself as Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper. What do you want? She asked, her tone icy. I found this briefcase. It belongs to Mr. Harding, I said, holding it out to her. Mrs. Jenkins's eyes narrowed further as she scrutinized the briefcase. How do I know you didn't steal it? She accused. I didn't steal it. I found it on the street, I insisted, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. Mrs. Jenkins hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Come with me, she said reluctantly, leading me through the grand gates and up the pathway to the mansion. As we walked, I couldn't help but marvel at the opulence around me. The mansion was a stunning piece of architecture, with its tall columns and intricate stonework. I felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine. We entered the mansion, and Mrs. Jenkins led me to a large study filled with books and rich mahogany furniture. A man in his late 40s sat behind a grand desk, looking up from his work as we entered. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, met mine with curiosity. Mr. Harding, this girl claims to have found your briefcase, Mrs. Jenkins announced, her tone still skeptical. Thomas Harding stood up and walked over to me, his gaze shifting to the briefcase. Is that so? He asked, his voice calm but probing. Yes, sir, I replied, holding out the briefcase. I found it on the street. I thought it might be important. Thomas took the briefcase from me and examined it carefully. A flicker of surprise crossed his face as he recognized it. These are indeed my documents, he said, looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Thank you for bringing them back. What's your name? Elena, I replied softly. Well, Elena, I appreciate your honesty, Thomas said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. Here, take this as a reward. I shook my head, my heart pounding. No, thank you. I don't want money. Thomas raised an eyebrow. What do you want then? I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. I want to be treated like a daughter for a week. Just 1 week. Thomas looked taken aback by my request, his eyes searching mine for a hidden agenda. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well, Elena. You have yourself a deal. Mrs. Jenkins's eyes widened in shock, but she remained silent as Thomas led me further into the mansion. My heart was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, hope, and a glimmer of excitement. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change all our lives forever. The moment I stepped inside the Harding mansion, I felt as though I had entered a different world. The grand foyer was adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow over the marble floors. Ornate tapestries and paintings lined the walls, each telling a story of elegance and history. The air smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood, a stark contrast to the musty streets I was used to. Thomas guided me through the spacious halls, his demeanor kind but reserved. Mrs. Jenkins followed closely behind, her disapproval evident in her tight-lipped silence. I couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and intimidation as we moved deeper into the mansion. "Elena," Thomas said, breaking the silence, "I want you to feel comfortable here. You can stay in one of the guest rooms." "Thank you, Mr. Harding," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, call me Thomas," he said with a small smile. "And this is Mrs. Jenkins, our housekeeper. She'll help you get settled." Mrs. Jenkins gave a curt nod, her eyes still filled with suspicion. "Follow me," she said, her tone formal. We walked up a grand staircase, the banister gleaming under the chandelier's light. Mrs. Jenkins led me down a hallway and stopped in front of a large oak door. She opened it to reveal a beautifully furnished room, complete with a four-poster bed, a writing desk, and a window that overlooked the lush gardens outside. "This will be your room for the week," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice softening slightly. "If you need anything, just let me know." "Thank you," I said, stepping into the room and taking in my surroundings. Mrs. Jenkins hesitated for a moment before turning to leave. "Dinner will be served in an hour. I'll come get you." As the door closed behind her, I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the plush comforter beneath me. The room was more luxurious than anything I had ever imagined. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This was my chance to prove myself, to show that I was more than just a beggar on the streets. An hour later, Mrs. Jenkins returned to escort me to the dining room. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice the cold stares from some of the staff. Whispers followed us, and I knew they were questioning my presence in such a grand home. The dining room was just as magnificent as the rest of the mansion. A long, polished table sat in the center, adorned with fine china and crystal glasses. Thomas was already seated at the head of the table, and beside him sat a woman with striking features and an air of elegance. She glanced at me with narrowed eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Elena, this is my wife, Isabel," Thomas said, gesturing towards her. "Isabel, this is Elena, the young lady who returned my briefcase." Isabel's eyes scanned me from head to toe, her expression unreadable. "Pleasure to meet you, Elena," she said, her tone cool. "Nice to meet you too, Mrs. Harding," I replied, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Please, have a seat," Thomas said, motioning to the chair across from Isabel. Dinner was served by the staff, who moved with practiced grace. The food was exquisite, unlike anything I had ever tasted before. As we ate, Thomas tried to engage me in conversation, asking about my life and how I had found the briefcase. Isabel remained mostly silent, her eyes flicking between Thomas and me with a hint of suspicion. "So, Elena," Thomas said, his tone gentle, "tell us about yourself. How did you come to be on the streets?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. I ran away from home a few years ago. Things weren't good there, and I thought I could find a better life on my own. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's brave of you to survive out there. It must not have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted, "but I managed. And when I found your briefcase, I knew I had to return it. It felt like the right thing to do." Isabel finally spoke, her voice sharp. "And what do you expect to gain from this, Elena? Surely you didn't do it out of pure kindness." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I just wanted to do the right thing. And maybe I hoped for a chance at something better." Thomas placed a hand on Isabel's arm, his expression firm. "Alina is our guest, Isabel. Let's give her a chance." Isabel's eyes softened slightly, but her skepticism remained. "Very well," she said, turning her attention back to her plate. After dinner, Thomas showed me to the library, a room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and plush armchairs. It was a place of comfort and knowledge, a stark contrast to the harsh realities I had known. "Feel free to spend time here," Thomas said. "You might find something that interests you." "Thank you, Thomas," I said, genuinely grateful. As I settled into one of the armchairs, a book in hand, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe this week would be the start of something new, a chance to rewrite my story. But as I glanced at Isabel, standing in the doorway with a wary expression, I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to prove myself worthy of this opportunity. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting a warm glow on the intricately designed carpets and walls. After a restless night filled with anxious thoughts, I was up early, wandering the halls and trying to make sense of my new surroundings. I still couldn't believe I was here, living in a place so different from the streets I'd known for years. Just as I was about to head back to my room, Mrs. Jenkins appeared. Her usual stern expression softened slightly. "Mr. Harding would like to speak with you in his study," she said. "Follow me." I nodded and followed her down a series of hallways, trying to steady my nerves. We reached a large wooden door, and Mrs. Jenkins knocked lightly before opening it and motioning for me to enter. Inside, Thomas sat behind a grand desk, the walls lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes and various artifacts. "Good morning, Alina." Thomas greeted me with a warm smile. "Please, have a seat." I took a seat in one of the plush chairs in front of his desk, feeling both nervous and curious about what he wanted to discuss. "I hope you slept well," Thomas began, folding his hands on the desk. "I wanted to have a proper conversation with you, to understand more about your situation and your request." "Thank you, Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying me thoughtfully. "Alina, you mentioned yesterday that you ran away from home. Can you tell me more about that?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my past pressing down on me. I grew up in a small town. My family, it wasn't a good place to be. My father was abusive, and my mother, she didn't do anything to stop it. I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran away. I've been living on the streets ever since. Thomas nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that, Alina. It must have been incredibly difficult for you." "It was," I admitted, "but I survived. I did what I had to do." Thomas paused for a moment, then continued. "And when you found my briefcase, you decided to bring it here. Why?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "When I found it, I saw your name on the documents and realized they were important. I thought, maybe if I returned them, it could change things for me. I didn't want money or anything like that. I just wanted a chance to feel like I belonged somewhere, even if it was just for a little while." Thomas's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "And that's why you asked to be treated like a daughter for a week?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's a strange request, but I've never had a real family. I just wanted to know what it felt like, even if it was only temporary." Thomas was silent for a moment, deep in thought. Finally, he spoke. "Alina, your honesty is refreshing. I can't imagine what you've been through, but I want to help you. If living here for a week can give you some sense of belonging and hope, then I think it's worth trying." I felt a surge of gratitude and relief wash over me. "Thank you, Thomas. You have no idea what this means to me." He smiled kindly. "Let's make the most of this week, then. Isabel and I will do our best to make you feel welcome here." As I left the study, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and apprehension. Thomas's kindness was genuine, but I knew Isabel was still wary of me. I hoped that, in time, I could prove to her that I wasn't a threat, that I was just a girl looking for a place to belong. Later that day, as I wandered the mansion's gardens, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation between Thomas and Isabel. I ducked behind a tall hedge, feeling guilty for eavesdropping but unable to resist. "Thomas, I don't understand why you're so willing to trust her." Isabel's voice was sharp, filled with skepticism. "We don't know anything about her. She could be lying about everything." "I understand your concerns, Isabel," Thomas replied calmly. "But sometimes we have to take a leap of faith. Alina's story moved me, and I believe she deserves a chance. And what if she takes advantage of our kindness?" Isabel countered. "What if she's hiding something?" "Then we'll deal with it if it comes to that," Thomas said firmly. "But for now, I want to give her this opportunity. I want to see if we can make a difference in her life." There was a long pause before Isabel spoke again, her voice softer. "I just don't want to see you get hurt, Thomas. You're too trusting sometimes." "I know," Thomas said gently. "But I also believe in the goodness of people. Let's give Alina a chance and see what happens." Hearing their conversation, I felt a mix of emotions. Thomas's faith in me was touching, but Isabel's distrust was a reminder of the uphill battle I faced. I knew I had to prove myself, not just to Thomas, but to Isabel as well. This week would be my chance to show them both that I was worth taking a chance on. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the dining room, casting a golden glow on the elegant table set for breakfast. I stood hesitantly at the doorway, feeling the weight of my patched clothes and worn shoes. Thomas had invited me to join him and his wife for breakfast, but I could feel the anxiety knotting in my stomach at the thought of meeting Isabel. "Come in, Alina," Thomas called out, his voice warm and inviting. "Have a seat." I stepped into the room, feeling like an intruder in this opulent space. Isabel sat at the head of the table, her expression cool and assessing. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her blonde hair neatly styled, and her blue eyes sharp and critical. I could tell she was a woman used to control and precision in her life. "Good morning, Isabel." Thomas greeted his wife with a smile before turning to me. "Alina, this is my wife, Isabel. Isabel, this is Alina, the young woman who found my documents." Isabel's gaze flickered over me, taking in my appearance. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Good morning, Alina," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Thank you for returning Thomas's documents." "Good morning, Mrs. Harding," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. It was the right thing to do. Isabel nodded slightly and turned her attention back to her breakfast. I could feel the tension in the room, an invisible barrier between us that I wasn't sure how to breach. Thomas seemed to sense it too, and he quickly tried to lighten the mood. "Alina has quite an interesting story, Isabel," Thomas said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "She ran away from home and has been living on the streets. She's been through a lot." Isabel's eyes narrowed slightly, and she set down her fork. "I'm sure she has," she said, her voice measured. "But that doesn't explain why she's here now." I swallowed hard, feeling the sting of her words. "I asked Thomas if I could stay for a week," I said quietly. "I wanted to know what it feels like to be part of a family, even if it's just for a little while." Isabel's expression didn't soften. "And what do you hope to gain from this experience, Alina?" she asked, her tone bordering on skepticism. I just wanted a chance to feel like I belonged somewhere," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never had that before." Thomas reached out and placed a reassuring hand on mine. "We're happy to give you that chance, Alina," he said firmly. "Isabel, I believe this is the right thing to do." Isabel sighed and picked up her fork again. "If you think so, Thomas," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "But I hope you understand the responsibilities that come with this decision." "I do," Thomas replied. "And I believe Alina does too." The rest of breakfast passed in relative silence, the only sounds being the clinking of silverware and the occasional murmur of conversation. Afterward, Thomas invited me to join him in the garden, where we could talk more freely. As we walked through the neatly manicured hedges and colorful flower beds, I couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. "Does Isabel hate me?" I asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at me. Thomas stopped and turned to me, his expression kind. "Isabel doesn't hate you, Elena. She's just cautious. We've been through a lot, and she wants to protect our home and our family. Give her some time." "I'll try," I said, though I wasn't sure how I would manage it. Isabel's coldness felt like an insurmountable wall. Later that day, I found myself alone in the library, browsing the shelves filled with books that I could only dream of reading. I heard footsteps and turned to see Isabel standing at the doorway, her arms crossed. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let her enter. Isabel walked over to a nearby shelf and ran her fingers along the spines of the books. "Thomas has a good heart," she said after a moment. "Sometimes too good. He's always looking for the best in people." "I know," I said quietly, "and I don't want to disappoint him." Isabel turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. "I hope you understand that trust is something that must be earned, Elena. You're a stranger in our home, and while Thomas may believe in you, I need more than words." "I understand," I said, meeting her gaze. "I just want a chance to prove myself." Isabel studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "We'll see, Elena. We'll see." As she left the library, I felt a renewed determination. Winning Isabel's trust wouldn't be easy, but I knew that if I wanted to make the most of this opportunity, I had to try. This week was my chance to show them both that I was worthy of their kindness and faith. The week began to unfold with a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. Each morning, I joined Thomas and Isabel for breakfast, the initial awkwardness slowly giving way to more relaxed conversations. Isabel remained guarded, but I could sense a slight thawing in her demeanor, perhaps a result of Thomas's unwavering support. One sunny afternoon, Thomas invited me to join him in the garden for some light gardening. It was a hobby he enjoyed, and he seemed eager to share it with me. "Have you ever done any gardening, Elena?" Thomas asked as he handed me a pair of gloves. "Not really," I admitted, slipping the gloves on, "but I'm willing to learn." Thomas smiled. "It's quite therapeutic. Plants don't judge. They just need care and attention. Much like people, really." We worked side by side, planting new flowers and trimming the hedges. Thomas patiently explained the different types of plants and their needs, and I found myself genuinely interested in this new world. "You have a natural touch," Thomas remarked as I carefully potted a vibrant red rose. "You're a quick learner." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a sense of pride. It's nice to do something productive. As we continued working, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. Thomas shared stories from his past, his journey to becoming a successful businessman, and the struggles he faced along the way. I listened intently, absorbing each story like a sponge. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" I said hesitantly. "Of course," he replied, looking up from his work. "Why did you agree to let me stay? I mean, you didn't have to." Thomas paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I suppose I saw a part of myself in you, Elena. When I was young, I had my share of hardships. I know what it's like to feel lost and alone. If I can make a difference in someone's life, even for a short time, I believe it's worth it." His words touched me deeply, and I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he said with a reassuring smile. Later that day, Isabel approached me in the living room, where I was reading a book Thomas had recommended. She seemed more at ease than before, though her skepticism hadn't entirely vanished. "May I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Of course," I replied, setting the book aside. Isabel settled into the chair and studied me for a moment. "Thomas tells me you've been very helpful in the garden." "I've enjoyed it," I said honestly. "It's been a learning experience." Isabel nodded. "Thomas has a good heart. He's always been the kind of person who wants to help others. I've noticed that, I said. He's been very kind to me. Isabel's expression softened slightly. I want to be honest with you, Elena. I'm still not entirely convinced about this arrangement, but I'm willing to give you a chance. I appreciate that, Mrs. Harding, I said earnestly. I just want to show you that I can be trusted. Isabel nodded again, her gaze thoughtful. We'll see, Elena. We'll see. As the days passed, Thomas and I continued to bond over various activities. We spent time in the garden, played chess in the evenings, and even went for walks in the nearby park. Each moment felt like a gift, a glimpse into a life I had only dreamed of. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Thomas shared a story that resonated deeply with me. There was a time when I almost gave up, he said, staring into the flames. I was young, struggling to make ends meet, and I felt like I had nowhere to turn. But then, someone gave me a chance, just like I'm giving you. It changed my life. Who was it? I asked, intrigued. A mentor, Thomas replied. An older gentleman who saw potential in me when no one else did. He believed in me, and that belief gave me the strength to keep going. I hope I can make the most of this chance, I said softly. I don't want to waste it. You won't, Thomas said confidently. I can see it in you, Elena. You have the strength and the determination to overcome anything. His words filled me with hope and determination. I was beginning to feel like I truly belonged, like I was part of something bigger than myself. Isabel, though still cautious, started to show small signs of acceptance. She invited me to join her for afternoon tea, where we discussed books, music, and other interests. Her demeanor remained reserved, but there was a subtle shift in her attitude, a faint hint of warmth. One afternoon, while we were having tea, Isabel shared a story from her own past. When I was young, my family went through a difficult time, she said, her voice softer than usual. We lost everything, and for a while, I felt like the world was against me. I listened intently, sensing the vulnerability in her words. What happened? We rebuilt our lives, Isabel said simply. It wasn't easy, but we persevered. That's why I'm so protective of what we have now. I don't want to go through that again. I understand, I said quietly. I want to earn your trust, Isabel. I really do. She looked at me for a long moment, her blue eyes searching mine. We'll see, Elena. We'll see. As the week progressed, the bonds between us grew stronger. Thomas's unwavering support, Isabel's gradual acceptance, and my determination to prove myself created a fragile but hopeful dynamic in the household. Each day brought new experiences and challenges, but I faced them with a renewed sense of purpose. This was my chance to build a better future, to find the family and belonging I had always yearned for, and I was determined to make the most of it, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The week had been an emotional roller coaster, filled with moments of joy, tension, and self-discovery. I had begun to feel a sense of belonging in Thomas and Isabel's home, but the fragile peace was soon shattered by a revelation that threatened to upend everything. One evening, as I was walking through the market, I ran into an old acquaintance from my days on the street. Joe, a scruffy man in his late 40s, recognized me immediately. Elena, is that you? He called out, hobbling over with a cane. Joe, it's been ages, I replied, giving him a warm hug. What brings you here? You look different, better, he said, scanning my new clothes and healthier appearance. I smiled. I've been staying with a kind family. They took me in for a week. Joe's eyes widened. You mean Thomas Harding's place? The big mansion? Yes, I confirmed. How did you know? Joe leaned in closer, lowering his voice. I heard some gossip. Something about Thomas's wife, Isabel. They say she might have intentionally discarded some important documents. My heart skipped a beat. What? Why would she do that? Joe shrugged. Who knows? Maybe to create some trouble or to get back at Thomas. It's just a rumor, but I thought you should know. As I walked back to the mansion, my mind raced with thoughts. Could Isabel really have done something so deceitful? And if so, why? I decided I had to confront her, but not without talking to Thomas first. Later that evening, I found Thomas in his study, reading a book. I hesitated at the door, unsure of how to bring up the subject. "Thomas, can I talk to you for a moment?" I asked, stepping inside. "Of course, Elena. What's on your mind?" he replied, setting the book aside. I took a deep breath. I ran into someone from my past today, and he mentioned something troubling. He said there's a rumor that Isabel might have intentionally discarded those documents you lost. Thomas's expression shifted from curiosity to shock. "What? That doesn't make any sense. Why would she do such a thing?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I thought you should hear about it. Maybe there's more to this than we know." Thomas stood up, pacing the room. "This is serious, Elena. If it's true, it could mean a lot of trouble for us. Should we talk to Isabel?" I suggested. "Yes," he agreed. "We need to get to the bottom of this." We found Isabel in the living room, arranging a bouquet of fresh flowers. She looked up as we entered, her eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of our serious expressions. "Isabel, we need to talk," Thomas said, his voice firm. "About what?" she asked, her tone guarded. Thomas glanced at me, then back at Isabel. "Elena heard something today. A rumor that you might have intentionally discarded the documents that went missing." Isabel's face turned pale, but she quickly composed herself. "That's absurd. Why would I do such a thing?" "I don't know," Thomas replied. "But it's important we clear this up. Did you have anything to do with it?" Isabel's eyes flashed with anger. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing? I've always supported you, Thomas. This is how you repay me." "I'm not accusing you," Thomas said calmly. "I just want the truth." "The truth?" Isabel scoffed. "The truth is, ever since that girl arrived, this household has been turned upside down. Maybe you should be questioning her instead." "That's enough," Thomas said sternly. "Elena has done nothing but help us. This isn't about her. It's about us and what might have happened." Isabel glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. If you want the truth, here it is. I didn't discard those documents, but I did know about them. I found them and put them aside, thinking they were unimportant. I didn't realize their significance until it was too late. Why didn't you say anything?" Thomas asked, his voice softening. "Because I was embarrassed," Isabel admitted, her voice breaking. "I didn't want you to think I was careless." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Isabel, you should have told me. We could have dealt with it together." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I felt a pang of sympathy for Isabel, despite her coldness toward me. "We can still make things right," I said gently. "The documents are safe now, and that's what matters." Thomas nodded, placing a comforting hand on Isabel's shoulder. "Elena's right. We can move forward from this. But we need to be honest with each other from now on." Isabel wiped her tears and nodded. "I understand. I'll do better." As the tension eased, I realized that this revelation, though painful, had brought us closer together. The trust we were building was fragile, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly part of this family, bound by honesty and a shared commitment to making things right. The revelation about Isabel's involvement with the documents had cast a shadow over the mansion, but it also brought an opportunity for healing and understanding. Despite the initial tension, there was a sense of determination among us to confront our issues head-on and rebuild trust. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still buzzing with the previous night's events. As I made my way to the kitchen, I found Isabel already there, making coffee. She glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable. "Morning," I said cautiously. "Morning," she replied, her voice neutral. We stood in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the coffee machine. Finally, I mustered the courage to speak. Isabel, I know this has been difficult for you. For all of us, I began. But I think we need to talk more about what happened and how we can move forward. Isabel sighed, her shoulders slumping. You're right. I don't know where to start. Maybe by being honest, I suggested gently, about why you felt you couldn't tell Thomas about the documents. She nodded slowly. I've always been afraid of failing him. Thomas has done so much for us. I didn't want to seem incompetent or careless. When I realized the documents were important, I panicked. I understand, I said, placing a hand on her arm. But honesty is the only way we can rebuild trust. Just then, Thomas walked in, looking tired but resolute. Good morning, ladies. Good morning, we replied in unison. Isabel, Elena, Thomas began, taking the seat at the kitchen table. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I realized that this isn't just about the documents. It's about how we communicate and trust each other. Isabel and I nodded, listening intently. We've all made mistakes, he continued. But what matters is how we address them and move forward. Isabel, I want you to know that I trust you. But we need to be open with each other. Isabel's eyes welled up with tears. I know, Thomas. I'm so sorry for everything. I'll do my best to be more honest and open. And Elena, Thomas turned to me. You've been a catalyst for change in this household. You've shown us the importance of honesty and integrity. I can't thank you enough. Thank you, Thomas, I said, feeling a warm sense of belonging. As we sat together, the tension slowly dissipated, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. We decided to take a walk around the estate, hoping the fresh air would clear our minds. As we strolled through the gardens, Isabel turned to me. Elena, there's something I've been meaning to ask. Why did you bring those documents to us in the first place? You could have easily kept them or discarded them. I smiled, recalling my decision. I saw the address on the documents and knew they belonged to someone important. But more than that, I believe that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is always worth it. Thomas nodded in agreement. Your actions have shown us that. And for that, we're grateful. Suddenly, Isabel stopped walking and faced Thomas and me. I have a confession to make. I've been feeling threatened by Elena's presence. I was scared she would replace me in your affections, Thomas. But now I see that she's brought us closer as a family. Thomas looked at Isabel, his expression softening. Isabel, no one could ever replace you. Our bond is strong, and we can make it even stronger by embracing the positive changes Elena has brought into our lives. Isabel smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. Thank you, Thomas. And thank you, Elena, for being the person you are. We continued our walk, the air feeling lighter, our steps more confident. The confrontation had led to a realization that honesty, trust, and love were the foundations of a strong family. And in that moment, I knew I had found not just a temporary home, but a family who cared for me as much as I cared for them.